Torvald Selleck had spent 40 years studying species across the galaxy. He had documented the rise and fall of empires. He had watched civilizations crumble and others grow from nothing. But in all his years as a diplomatic historian for the Velthari people, he had never seen anything like the humans. They had joined the Galactic Council only 10 years ago. 10 years was nothing. Some species waited centuries before they earned a voice in council matters. But humans were impatient creatures. They pushed and demanded and somehow charmed their way into conversations they had no business joining. Torvald found them fascinating. That was why he had requested assignment to observe their integration into galactic society. He wanted to understand how such a young species could make so much noise. On this particular day, he stood in the great chamber of Valith Prime, the neutral station where the Galactic Council held its meetings. The chamber was enormous, built to hold representatives from over 300 species. Light filtered through crystal ceilings, and the air carried the mixed scents of a dozen different atmospheres. Something terrible had happened. The Draxith Collective had attacked. The Draxith were conquerors. They moved from system to system, consuming resources and enslaving populations. The Council had tried diplomacy with them for decades. It never worked. The Draxith only understood strength, and the Council preferred words over weapons. This time, the Draxith had struck the Ilari homeworld. The Ilari were a gentle species. They had no military. They created art and music and believed in peace above all things. The Council had promised to protect them. That promise meant nothing now. Images played on the central display, showing burning cities and fleeing civilians. Ilari bodies lay in the streets. Children screamed for parents who would never answer. High Arbiter Zelkan, the elderly leader of the Council, called for order. His voice was tired. He had seen too many atrocities and done too little to stop them. "We must respond with measured consideration," Zelkan said. "The Draxith fleet is vast. We cannot risk open war." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Species nodded their heads or waved their tentacles or clicked their mandibles in approval. Caution was the Council way. Caution kept them safe. Then the human ambassador stood. Kevin Ortiz was not a tall man. He was average in almost every way that Torvald could measure. Brown hair, brown eyes, a face that would blend into any crowd. But when he spoke, the chamber fell silent. "The Ilari trusted us," Ortiz said. His voice was calm, but something sharp lived beneath the surface. "They gave up their weapons because we promised protection. Now their children are dying, and you want measured consideration?" Selkan raised a hand. "Ambassador Ortiz, humanity is new to these matters. You do not understand the complexity of—" "I understand dead children," Ortiz interrupted. "That is not complex." A ripple of shock moved through the chamber. No one interrupted the High Arbiter. It simply was not done. Ortiz continued without pause. "Humanity will lead the defense of Ilari Prime. We ask for volunteers from other species, but we will go alone if we must." Torvald leaned forward in his observation seat. This was unexpected. Humans had a small fleet. Their technology was generations behind most Council species. What could they possibly hope to accomplish? Zelkan shook his head slowly. "Ambassador, your courage is noted, but your fleet cannot match the Draxith. They outnumber you significantly. Your ships are primitive by our standards. This would be suicide." The chamber doors opened before Ortiz could respond. A woman walked in, and Torvald felt the atmosphere change immediately. She wore a military uniform covered in medals and insignia he did not recognize. Her hair was gray, cut short and practical. Her eyes scanned the room like a predator assessing threats. Admiral Claire Dawson had arrived. "High Arbiter," she said, her voice cutting through the whispers. "I have already mobilized my fleet. We leave within the hour." Zelkan stood straighter, clearly annoyed. "Admiral, the Council has not authorized military action. You cannot simply—" "The Ilari are dying right now," Dawson said. "Every minute we spend talking, more of them die. You can authorize action, or you can watch us leave without it. Either way, we go." Torvan studied the Admiral carefully. She showed no fear, no hesitation. But there was something else in her expression, something he could not quite identify. It was not anger, though anger would have made sense. It was colder than anger, more patient. A Draxith ambassador stepped forward from the shadows. Torvan had not noticed him before. The Draxith were tall creatures, covered in dark scales, with eyes that reflected no light. This one smiled with too many teeth. "Admiral Dawson," the Draxith said, "your species is young and foolish. The Ilari belong to us now. If you interfere, we will destroy you as easily as we destroyed them." Dawson turned to face the Draxith. She did not raise her voice. She did not make threats. She simply looked at him and spoke 4 words. "You targeted their children." The Draxith laughed. "Children, adults, it makes no difference. The weak exist to serve the strong. This is the natural order." Dawson nodded slowly, as if she had expected this answer. Then she turned back to the Council. "Remember this moment," she said. "Remember that you could have stopped this years ago. Remember that you chose not to." She walked toward the exit, and Commander Derek Pham fell into step beside her. Tovan had read about Pham in human military records. He was a tactical genius, they said. He had never lost a battle. Torvan made a decision. He grabbed his recording equipment and hurried after them. "Admiral Dawson," he called. "I am Torvan Selleck, a historian for the Veltari. May I accompany your fleet? I wish to document what happens." Dawson stopped and studied him. Her eyes were cold, but not cruel. "You want to watch us fail?" she asked. "I want to understand your species," Torvan said honestly. "You are outnumbered and outgunned, yet you show no fear. Why?" Dawson glanced at Pham, who shrugged. "Come if you want," she said. "But stay out of the way when the fighting starts." Torvan followed them to the shuttle bay. Behind them, the council chamber erupted in arguments and debates that would accomplish nothing. Ahead, a fleet prepared for war against impossible odds as the shuttle lifted off. Torvan looked back at Valith Prime, growing smaller in the distance. He had a strange feeling in his chest, something he had not felt in decades of observing galactic events. He was afraid. Not of the humans, but of what they might become when pushed too far. Commander Pham noticed his expression and smiled without warmth. "You should be afraid," Pham said quietly. "Not of us. Of what the Draxith have awakened." The shuttle docked with the USS Resolute, and Torvan stepped aboard a human warship for the first time. The corridors hummed with activity. Crew members moved with purpose, their faces set in grim determination. None of them smiled. None of them joked. They prepared for battle like it was the most natural thing in the world. Torvan realized then that he had made a mistake in his assessment. He had thought humans were young and foolish, like everyone else believed, but watching them prepare for war, he understood something the Council had missed. Humans were not rushing into battle because they were foolish. They were rushing in because they had done this before, countless times across their bloody history, and they knew exactly what they were about to become. The USS Resolute was not what Torvan had expected. Council warships were quiet and clean, designed for comfort during long voyages. This human vessel was loud and crowded and smelled like metal and sweat. Torvan had been given a small cabin near the observation deck. It was barely large enough for him to stretch his limbs, but the humans seemed to think it was generous. Their own quarters were even smaller, stacked like boxes in a cargo hold. He spent the first day simply watching them. The crew worked in shifts, but the shifts never truly ended. When one group finished their duties, another took over immediately. There was no gap, no moment of rest for the ship itself. The Resolute was a living thing, constantly moving, constantly preparing. Lieutenant Nina Reyes ran the communications station on the bridge. She was a young woman with dark hair tied back in a practical knot. Her fingers moved across her console without pause, coordinating messages between dozens of ships in the fleet. Torvan approached her during a brief, quiet moment. "Lieutenant," he said, "may I ask you something?" Reyes glanced at him but kept working. "Make it quick. Why do you fight? The Ilari are strangers to your species. You have no treaty with them, no obligation." Reyes stopped typing. She looked at him with an expression he could not read. "Did you see the footage?" she asked. "The city's burning? The family's running?" "Yes. Then you know why we fight." She returned to her work. Some things do not need treaties. Torvan moved deeper into the ship. He found Sergeant Marcus Cole in the training area, running his Marine squad through combat drills. Cole was a large man with scars on his arms and a face that looked carved from stone. The squad moved through simulated combat scenarios with frightening speed. They cleared rooms, rescued hostages, and eliminated targets in seconds. Their communication was minimal, mostly hand signals and grunts. They understood each other without words. After the drill ended, Torvan approached the sergeant. "Your squad is impressive," he said. Cole wiped sweat from his forehead. "We have to be. Draxith ground forces are tough. 3 meters tall, armored scales, 4 arms each. One of them can kill a dozen regular soldiers. And yet you will fight them?" Cole smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We have fought worse." Torvan did not know what could be worse than the Draxith, but he did not ask. Something in Cole's eyes warned him away from that question. In the medical bay, he found Dr. Amy Sutton organizing supplies. She was an older woman with gentle hands and tired eyes. Around her, medical staff prepared beds and equipment for casualties that had not yet occurred. "You expect heavy losses," Torvan observed. Dr. Sutton did not look up from her work. "I always expect heavy losses. That way I am never unprepared. Does it not disturb you? Preparing for your own people to die." Now she looked at him. Her expression was patient, like a teacher explaining something to a slow student. "Every person on this ship knows they might die tomorrow. They came anyway. My job is to make sure as many of them as possible go home to their families." She paused. "And to make sure the Ilari wounded get the same care as our own. You will treat enemy species? The Ilari are not our enemy. They are victims. We treat victims." Torvan left the medical bay with more questions than answers. That evening, Admiral Dawson called a briefing in the main conference room. The senior officers gathered around a holographic display showing the Ilari system. Torvan stood in the corner, recording everything. Intelligence reports confirmed the Draxith fleet numbers approximately 120 warships. Commander Pham reported, "We have 43. 43 against 120, Admiral Dawson repeated. "Acceptable." Torvan nearly dropped his recording device. "Acceptable?" The humans were outnumbered nearly 3-1, and their commander called it acceptable? Lieutenant Reyes pulled up tactical data. The Draxith have established a blockade around Ilari Prime. They are using the planet's population as shields, betting we will not attack with civilians in the crossfire. "They are correct," Dawson said. "We will not bombard the planet. But we do not need to." She turned to Pham. "Show them the approach." Pham manipulated the display. The Ilari system has a dense asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets. The Draxith have ignored it because their ships are too large to navigate safely. Ours are not. We go through the belt, Dawson continued. We emerge behind their blockade line. While they are repositioning, our marine teams drop to the surface and begin civilian evacuation. The Draxith will pursue us into the belt, one officer said. Yes. Dawson's smile was thin and cold. We are counting on it. Torvan understood then. The humans were not planning a fair battle. They were planning a trap. They would use their smaller ships and faster reflexes to lure the Draxith into terrain that favored. Human tactics thought it was clever. It was also insane. A single mistake in the asteroid belt would destroy a ship instantly. After the briefing, Torvan found Sergeant Cole reviewing footage on a personal screen. The footage showed Draxith soldiers moving through Ilari cities, dragging civilians from their homes. Cole's face showed no emotion as he watched. His squad sat around him, equally silent. We hit ground zero 6 hours after fleet engagement begins, Cole said without looking up. Primary objective is civilian extraction. Secondary objective is making the Draxith regret every step they took on that planet. And if you encounter superior forces? Torvan asked. Cole finally looked at him. There are no superior forces. There are only forces that have not met us yet. Private Lucas Grant, the youngest member of the squad, spoke up. Sir, intelligence says they have been taking children, using them as labor in the mining operations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Torvan watched the humans' expressions change. It was subtle but unmistakable. Whatever restraint they had been maintaining dissolved in that moment. Then we had a third objective, Cole said quietly. We bring every child home. Every single one. Torvan returned to his cabin that night unable to sleep. He had studied many species in his career. He understood their motivations, their fears, their desires. But humans were different. Other species fought for territory, for resources, for survival. Humans fought for those things too. But they also fought for something else, something harder to define. They called it justice. They called it protection. They called it doing what was right. Torvan had always thought those were just words. Pretty concepts that crumbled when faced with reality. But watching the crew of the Resolute prepare for battle, he began to wonder if he had been wrong. These humans knew they might die. Many of them probably would die. And yet they moved forward without hesitation, because somewhere on a planet they had never visited, children were suffering. His communicator chimed. A message from the bridge. Contact in 8 hours. All hands prepare for combat. Torvan looked out his small window at the stars rushing past. Somewhere ahead, the Draxith waited with their massive fleet, and their cruelty and their certainty of victory. They had no idea what was coming for them. Admiral. Dawson's voice came over the ship-wide channel. Calm and steady. This is the Admiral. You all know why we are here. You all know the odds. I will not lie to you and say this will be easy. It will not be. Some of us will not come home. She paused. But the Ilari cannot fight for themselves. Their children cannot protect themselves. So we will do it for them. Because that is what we do. That is who we are. Another pause. They brought 120 ships. They think that is enough. Let us show them how wrong they are. The channel closed. Around the ship, Torvan heard humans responding with a sound he had never heard before. It was not a cheer. It was not a war cry. It was quiet determination. Thousands of voices murmuring the same thing. Let us show them. Torvan finally understood what he had seen in Admiral Dawson's eyes back at the council chamber. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was certainty. The certainty of a species that had been fighting impossible odds since they first crawled out of their caves. The certainty of predators who have become protectors. The certainty of humans going to war. The asteroid belt was chaos made solid. Torvald gripped his seat on the observation deck as the Resolute twisted between massive rocks spinning through the void. Alarms screamed. The ship shook with near misses that would have destroyed lesser vessels. And the humans flew like they had been born in this madness. Commander Pham stood at the tactical station, calling out commands faster than Torvald could follow. The helmsman responded instantly, sending the ship through gaps that seemed impossible. Behind them, Draxith warships followed. But the massive vessels could not match human agility. One after another, they crashed into asteroids or collided with each other. Explosions lit up the belt like dying stars. 12 enemy vessels destroyed, Lieutenant Reyes reported. They are pulling back to regroup. Do not let them, Admiral Dawson ordered. All ships, press the attack. Drive them into Sector 7. Torvald watched the tactical display with growing disbelief. The humans had turned the asteroid belt into a weapon. They knew every rock, every spin pattern, every gap. They had studied this terrain and memorized it while the Draxith had dismissed it as impassable. The Resolute burst out of the belt behind the Draxith blockade line. For a moment, Torvald saw Ilari Prime hanging in space, a beautiful world of blue oceans and green continents. Smoke rose from several cities. The Draxith had been thorough in their cruelty. All weapons, target the command ship, Dawson ordered. Everything we have. The Resolute opened fire. Energy beams and missiles streaked across the void, slamming into a massive Draxith vessel that had been coordinating the blockade. The ship's shields flickered and failed. Its hull cracked open, spilling atmosphere and bodies into space around them. The rest of the human fleet emerged from the asteroid belt. 43 ships against the remaining Draxith forces. The numbers were still against them, but the Draxith formation had been shattered. They were scattered, confused, and leaderless. The humans were none of those things. Marine teams. Launch, Dawson commanded. Torvald watched dozens of small dropships detach from the fleet and plunge toward Ilari Prime. Each one carried soldiers ready to fight on the ground. Sergeant Cole was down there somewhere, leading his squad into hell. A Draxith cruiser moved to intercept the dropships. Commander Pham reacted before Torvald could even process the threat. Hard to port. Bring us between them and our people. The Resolute swung into the path of the enemy ship. Both vessels opened fire simultaneously. The Resolute shuddered as enemy weapons tore through her shields and bit into her hull. Damage report, Dawson demanded. Deck 7 through 9 venting atmosphere. Shields at 12%. Weapons still operational. Then keep firing. Torvald watched in horror as the Resolute traded blow for blow with a ship twice her size. The humans did not retreat. They did not seek cover. They stood their ground and absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them. Because behind them, the dropships were landing safely. The Draxith cruiser finally broke apart under sustained fire. But the Resolute was wounded badly. Smoke filled the corridors. Emergency crews rushed to seal breaches and rescue trapped personnel. Admiral Dawson did not pause to assess the damage. All ships, form on the Resolute. We push them back to the outer system. Admiral, Pham said quietly, we have lost 11 ships. Several others are combat ineffective. How many Draxith remain? Approximately 60 vessels. Dawson nodded. Then, we still outnumber them in spirit. Continue the attack. Torvald did not understand how 32 damaged ships could outnumber 60 enemy vessels. But the humans believed it, and somehow that belief became reality. On the surface of Ilari Prime, Sergeant Cole's squad fought through streets filled with debris and bodies. The Draxith had fortified the capital city, turning every building into a defensive position. It did not matter. Cole's team moved like shadows, appearing from unexpected angles and disappearing before the Draxith could respond. They communicated through hand signals and instinct, reading each other's movements without conscious thought. Corporal Danielle Vance had found a position overlooking the main evacuation route. Through her scope, she watched Alari civilians streaming toward the landing zone where human dropships waited. Draxith soldiers were moving. To cut them off, I count 15 hostiles approaching from the east, she reported through her communicator. They will reach the civilians in 3 minutes. Can you slow them down? Cole asked. I can do better than that. Vance began firing. Each shot found its mark, punching through Draxith armor and dropping soldiers in their tracks. The aliens scattered, seeking cover from a sniper they could not locate. For 11 minutes, Vance held that position alone. She fired until her weapon overheated, then fired again. When Drax's soldiers tried to flank her, she relocated and continued killing. 300 Ilari children passed through the evacuation corridor while she held the line. 300 children who would have been captured or killed reached the safety of human dropships. When Cole's squad finally reached her position, they found her wounded but still firing. A Draxith energy bolt had burned through her left arm. She had tied it off with her belt and kept shooting with her right hand. Corporal, you are relieved, Cole said. Negative, sir. There are still civilians in the area. That was not a request. Vance lowered her weapon reluctantly. She had killed 23 Draxith soldiers in 11 minutes with a burned arm, and no backup. Cole ordered a medic to treat her wounds. Then he gathered the rest of the squad. Intelligence says there is a detention facility 2 kilometers north. They are holding Ilari workers there, including children. Private Grant checked his weapon. His hands were steady, but his eyes burned with something cold. Then we go north, he said. The squad moved out. They left a trail of Draxith bodies behind them. In orbit, the battle continued. Human ships darted between enemy vessels, striking weak points and withdrawing before the Draxith could respond. They fought like wolves harassing a herd of much larger prey. Tarvon watched a human destroyer ram a Draxith battleship rather than let it reach the evacuation zone. The destroyer's crew had 30 seconds to reach escape pods before impact. Not all of them made it, but the battleship was destroyed and the evacuation continued. Admiral, Reyes called out, Draxith Command is broadcasting a surrender demand. They want us to cease fire and withdraw. Dawson laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Put them on screen. The Draxith commander appeared. He was massive, even for his species, covered in ritual scars that marked him as a veteran of many conquests. Human Admiral, he said, you have fought well, but this battle is pointless. You cannot defeat us. Withdraw now, and we will allow you to leave with your surviving ships. Dawson stood before the screen, her uniform stained with smoke and her face marked with exhaustion. She looked at the Draxith commander for a long moment. You attacked civilians under our protection, she said. You enslaved their children. You burned their cities while they begged for mercy. They were weak. The weak serve the strong. This is the natural order. Dawson nodded slowly. I see. In that case, let me explain something about the natural order on my world. She leaned forward. On Earth, the most dangerous creature is not the largest or the strongest. It is the one that protects its children. A mother bear will fight anything that threatens her cubs. A wolf pack will hunt until they drop to feed their young. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. You threaten children. Not even your own species' children. Someone else's children who could not fight back. And you expected us to let that stand. She straightened. We do not surrender. We do not withdraw. You will answer for every child you have harmed. Every single one. She cut the transmission. Target the enemy flagship, she ordered. All batteries fire. The Resolute opened fire with everything she had left. Around her, The remaining human ships did the same. The Draxith flagship disappeared in a ball of fire that briefly outshone the local star. The Draxith fleet did not surrender, but it broke. Ships scattered in every direction, fleeing the system as fast as their engines could carry them. Torvald stood on the observation deck, watching the enemy retreat. His hands were shaking. He had studied war for decades. He had watched empires clash and civilizations fall. He had never seen anything like this. The humans had won. Outnumbered, outgunned, fighting in unfamiliar space against a superior enemy. They had won because they simply refused to lose. Admiral Dawson's voice came over the ship-wide channel. All hands. The orbital battle is complete. Begin recovery operations and continue supporting ground evacuation. We are not done until every Ilari civilian is safe. The crew responded with tired cheers. They had been fighting for hours without rest. Many of them were wounded. Many of their friends were dead, but they kept working, because there were still people to save. Torvald finally understood. What made humans different? It was not their technology, or their tactics, or their physical endurance. It was their refusal to accept that some lives mattered less than others, and that refusal made them terrifying. The silence after battle was worse than the noise during it. Torvald walked through the corridors of the Resolute, stepping over debris and around repair crews working to keep the ship alive. The vessel had taken terrible damage. Entire sections were sealed off, either because of hull breaches or because the bodies inside had not yet been recovered. The humans worked without complaint. They welded broken pipes, rerouted power systems, and carried wounded comrades to the medical bay. No one spoke unless necessary. No one cried, but Torvald could see the weight on their shoulders. Every face he passed carried the same expression: exhaustion, grief, and something else. Beneath it all, relief that they had survived. Guilt that others had not died in the medical bay. Dr. Sutton had been working for over 30 hours straight. Her team had treated hundreds of casualties, both human and Ilari. The beds were full. The floors were full. Patients waited in the corridors. Too many for the space available. Torvald found her bent over an Ilari child, carefully cleaning a wound on the small creature's arm. The child was crying softly, calling for her mother in a language Torvald did not understand. "It is all right," Dr. Sutton murmured. "You are safe now. We will find your family." She did not know if the child's family was alive. She did not know if she could keep that promise. But she made it anyway, because the child needed to hear it. A human medic approached with a datapad. "Doctor, we have more wounded incoming from the surface." Another 18, including Sergeant Cole. Dr. Sutton did not look up from her patient. "Prepare treatment area 3. I will be there in 2 minutes. Doctor, you need rest. You have been awake for. I will rest when everyone is stable." Her voice left no room for argument. 2 minutes. The medic nodded and hurried away. Torvald followed the medical team as they brought in the ground forces casualties. Sergeant Cole was on one of the stretchers, his left leg wrapped in bloody bandages. He was conscious, arguing with the medics trying to carry him. "Put me down." "I can walk." "Sir, your leg is broken in 3 places." "Then I will hop." "There are people who need these stretchers more than me." The medics ignored him and continued toward the medical bay. Cole caught Torvald's eye as they passed. "Historian," he said. "You still watching?" "Yes," Cole grunted. "Then watch this. This is what war really costs." The medical bay doors opened, and Torvald saw what Cole meant. Rows of wounded soldiers lay on beds and floors. Some were missing limbs. Some had burns covering most of their bodies. Some were quiet, staring at ceilings, their eyes empty. Dr. Sutton moved through them like a force of nature, treating injuries that would have made Torvan vomit. She spoke softly to each patient, offering comfort alongside medicine. "You are doing well. The hard part is over. You are going home." Some of them would not go home. Torvan could see it in her eyes. She knew which patients would survive and which would not. But she treated everyone the same, giving her best to those who had given everything. On the surface of Alari Prime, the evacuation continued. Private Grant walked through a refugee camp, handing out water and food to Alari civilians who had lost everything. Most of them did not understand his language, but they understood his kindness. He had not slept in 2 days. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, some of it his own. But he kept moving, because there were people who needed help. An Alari child approached him. She was small, maybe 4 or 5 years old by human standards. Her clothes were burned, and she clutched a piece of fabric that might have been a blanket, or a piece of her mother's dress. She said something in Alari. Grant did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was alone. Her family was gone. Grant knelt down to her level. He reached out slowly, carefully, and the child flinched. She had learned to fear large creatures with weapons. "It is okay," he said softly. "I am not going to hurt you. I am here to help." The child did not understand his words, but she understood his tone. She understood his gentle movements and his sad eyes. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Grant held her carefully, feeling her small body shake with silent sobs. He did not know what to say. He did not know if there was anything that could make this better. So he just held her and let her cry. Later, when the evacuation coordinators tried to place her in a refugee center, Grant refused to let her go. "I will take care of her," he said, "until we find her family." "Private, that is not protocol. I do not care about protocol. She trusts me. I am not going to abandon her." The coordinators exchanged looks, then nodded. Protocol mattered less than keeping a traumatized child calm. Grant carried the child onto the evacuation shuttle. She fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted, but finally feeling safe. He named her Hope, because that was what she represented. Back on the Resolute, Admiral Dawson stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The fleet had gathered around Alari Prime, what remained of it. 17 ships destroyed, 12 more damaged beyond repair. Thousands of crew members dead or wounded. They had won. But victory felt hollow. Torvan approached carefully. He had learned that humans needed space to process grief. "Admiral," he said, "may I speak with you?" Dawson did not turn around. "Ask your questions, historian. Your fleet lost nearly 40% of its strength. Your crew suffered terrible casualties. The Council would call this a Pyrrhic victory. The Council was not here. Why did you do it? Why sacrifice so much for a species you barely knew?" Dawson finally turned. Her face was tired, lined with exhaustion and sorrow. But her eyes were clear, because no one else would. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. Dawson walked to the window, looking down at Alari Prime. "When I was a child, my grandmother told me a story. A fire broke out in a building. Everyone ran away except one person who ran inside to save a stranger's child." She paused. Someone asked that person why they risked their life for someone they did not know. They said, "Because the child needed saving, and I could save them." It was that simple. Torvan considered this. Your species believes that helping others is worth dying for? Not always. We are not saints. We are capable of terrible selfishness and cruelty. Dawson shook her head. But sometimes, when we see innocent suffering, something inside us breaks. And we cannot look away. We cannot do nothing, even if it costs us everything. A communication alert chimed. Dawson touched her earpiece. "Admiral, this is Lieutenant Reyes. We are receiving a message from the Ilari government. They want to speak with you. Put them through." A hologram appeared. An elderly Ilari stood in what remained of a government building, surrounded by ruins and survivors. "Admiral Dawson," the Ilari said. "I am Elder Ilara Sheth, leader of my people. I do not have words sufficient to thank you for what you have done." Dawson nodded. "I am sorry we could not save more. You saved millions. Millions who would be dead or enslaved without your intervention." The elder's voice broke slightly. "We had given up hope. We thought the galaxy had abandoned us. Then your ships came. We did what anyone should have done." "No," the elder shook her head. "You did what no one else was willing to do. And we will never forget it." The transmission ended. Dawson stared at the empty space where the hologram had been. "Torvan," she said quietly. "Yes, Admiral? Make sure you include this in your history. Not the battle. Not the tactics. This." She gestured at the damaged ship around them, at the wounded crew working to save each other. The cost. The grief. The choice to pay that cost anyway. Why is that important? Because war is not glorious. It is not exciting or heroic. It is blood and death and broken families. Dawson turned to face him directly. "We do not fight because we love war. We fight because sometimes war is the only way to protect people who cannot protect themselves. And someone has to be willing to pay that price." She walked toward the door, then paused. "If your history only shows the victory, you have told a lie. Show them the funerals we will hold tomorrow. Show them the children who will grow up without parents. Show them everything." "I will," Torvan promised. Dawson nodded and left. Torvan stood alone on the observation deck, watching the fleet gather around the world they had saved. Rescue shuttles moved between ships, carrying wounded and supplies. Communication channels buzzed with coordination efforts. The humans had won an impossible victory, but there was no celebration, no triumph. Just exhausted people continuing to work because there was still work to be done. He began composing his report in his mind. The council needed to understand what he had witnessed. Not just the power, not just the fury. The compassion, the sacrifice, the willingness to give everything for strangers. That was what made humanity dangerous. That was what made humanity beautiful. And Torvan was no longer sure which quality frightened him more. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Ilari Prime. Torvan stood in the great chamber of Valith Prime once again, but everything felt different now. The same crystal ceilings filtered light from above. The same mixed atmospheres filled the air. The same representatives from hundreds of species filled the seats, but they looked at the humans differently now. Ambassador Kevin Ortiz sat in the human delegation section, wearing the same simple suit he had worn before. Admiral Claire Dawson sat beside him in her formal uniform, her face calm and unreadable. Behind them, a small group of human officers and diplomats waited in silence. High Arbiter Zelkan called the chamber to order. His voice was quieter than before, less certain of its authority. "We are gathered to hear the official report on the Ilari intervention," Zelkan announced. Historian Torvan Selik of the Valthry has prepared a complete account. He witnessed the events firsthand. Torvan stepped forward to the speaker's platform. He had spent weeks preparing this report. Every word mattered. Every detail had to be precise. "Honored representatives," he began, "I was granted permission to accompany the human fleet during their defense of Ilari Prime. What I witnessed has changed my understanding of this species entirely." He activated the holographic display. Images appeared showing the human fleet departing Valith Prime. When the humans volunteered to defend the Ilari, this council dismissed them. We called their technology primitive. We called their numbers insufficient. We assumed they would fail. The images changed to show the battle in the asteroid belt. We were wrong. The humans did not fight the way other species fight. They did not seek fair engagements or favorable odds. They turned every disadvantage into a weapon. They used terrain, speed, and coordination to destroy enemies 3 times their number. More images. The Resolute taking fire while protecting evacuation shuttles. Human soldiers fighting through occupied cities. Medical teams treating Ilari wounded. But their military capability is not what makes humans dangerous. Other species have powerful weapons. Other species have skilled warriors. What humans have is something else entirely. Torvan paused, gathering his thoughts. I watched a human corporal hold a defensive position alone for 11 minutes with a burned arm, because 300 children were passing through the evacuation corridor behind her. I watched a human private adopt an orphaned Ilari child on the battlefield rather than leave her to the refugee system. I watched a human doctor work for 36 hours without rest because patients still needed her. The chamber was silent. Representatives leaned forward, listening. Humans do not fight for territory or resources alone. They fight for something they call justice. They fight for the right of innocence to live in peace. And when they see that right violated, especially when children are harmed, they become something terrifying. Torvan looked directly at the human delegation. I asked Admiral Dawson why her species sacrificed so much for strangers. She told me, because no one else would. She said it as if it were obvious, as if any other answer would be unthinkable. He deactivated the display. That is what makes humans dangerous. Not their weapons or their ships or their tactics. Their conviction. Their belief that some things are worth dying for, even if those things belong to someone else. Elder Ilara Sheth rose from the Ilari delegation section. She was frail, her body still recovering from the stress of the invasion, but her voice was strong. May I address the council? Zelkan nodded. The council recognizes Elder Sheth. The Ilari leader walked slowly to the center of the chamber. She looked around at the assembled representatives, then turned to face the human delegation. My people were dying, she said simply. Our cities burned. Our children were taken. We sent messages to every species we knew, begging for help. Do you know how many responded? She let the question hang in the air. One species out of 300 sent ships. One species risked their people to save ours. She turned to address the full council. You promised to protect us. You signed treaties and made speeches about mutual defense. When the Draxith came, you offered measured consideration. Her voice grew harder. The humans offered blood. They offered their lives. They gave us everything they had because they could not stand by while innocents suffered. She walked to where Admiral Dawson sat and bowed deeply. My people have a title reserved for those who have earned our highest honor. We call them Guardians of the Forgotten. It is given to those who protect those whom others have abandoned. She straightened. I bestow this title upon humanity. Now and forever, you are our protectors, our friends, our family. Admiral Dawson stood and returned the bow. We are honored, Elder Sheth, and we will always answer when you call. High Arbiter Zelkan cleared his throat. The political implications of what he was about to do clearly made him uncomfortable. But he had no choice. The Council formally acknowledges humanity's successful defense of Ilari Prime, he said. In recognition of their sacrifice and capability, we propose granting humanity a permanent seat on the Council and authority over joint military operations. Murmurs spread through the chamber. This was unprecedented. Species waited centuries for such recognition. Humanity had earned it in a single battle. Ambassador Ortiz rose to respond. We accept the seat, he said, and we accept military authority. But we have conditions. Zelkan frowned. Conditions? Humanity will protect any species that requests our aid. We will defend the weak against the strong. We will answer calls for help without hesitation. Ortiz paused. But we will never conquer. We will never rule. We will fight only to protect, never to dominate. That is acceptable, Zelkin said slowly. One more thing. Ortiz looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. If we take on this responsibility, we expect others to share it. We will not be the galaxy's only defenders. We will train and support any species willing to stand beside us. Because protecting the innocent should not be humanity's burden alone. The vote was unanimous. Humanity gained their seat on the council and their role as military guardians. Other species volunteered to join their defense coalition. The galaxy, for the first time in generations, began to unite around something other than fear. After the formal session ended, Torvan found Admiral Dawson standing by a window overlooking the station's docking bay. Beside her stood a small figure holding her hand. It was the Alari child. Hope. Private Grant stood nearby, never letting the child out of his sight. Admiral, Torvan said. May I ask one final question for my report? Dawson nodded. The Draxith were brutal. They killed innocents without mercy. Yet when the battle ended, you did not pursue them. You did not seek revenge. Why? Dawson looked down at the child holding her hand. Hope looked back up at her with complete trust. Because revenge would not bring back the dead, she said. It would not heal the wounded or comfort the orphans. It would only create more suffering. But they deserved punishment. Perhaps, but our job was not punishment. Our job was protection. She smiled slightly. We broke their fleet. We saved the Ilari. We showed the galaxy that cruelty has consequences. That is enough, is it? It has to be. Because if we become what we fight against, we lose something more important than any battle. Torvan considered this. He had witnessed human fury in combat. He had seen them destroy enemies without hesitation. But here, after everything, they chose mercy. You confuse me, he admitted. You fight with such ferocity, then show such compassion. How can both exist in the same species? Admiral Dawson picked up Hope, settling the child on her hip. The little Ilari rested her head on Dawson's shoulder, already falling asleep. Because they are the same thing, Dawson said. We fight fiercely because we love deeply. We destroy our enemies because we cannot stand to see innocents suffer. The fury and the compassion come from the same place. She looked at Torvan with tired eyes. That is why the cosmos trembles before us, historian. Not because of our weapons or our ships. Because we will burn worlds to protect a single child. And we will weep while doing it. Torvan watched them walk away. The admiral of a fleet that had broken an empire, carrying a sleeping orphan like she was the most precious thing in the galaxy. Private Grant followed, his hand resting on Hope's back. They disappeared into the crowd of diplomats and representatives. Just another family making their way home. Torvan returned to his quarters and began writing the final section of his report. He had witnessed humans rush into war. He had seen their fury and their sacrifice and their compassion. He had watched them pay a terrible price for strangers. They had never met Dot, and now he understood why the cosmos trembled before them. It was not their strength. Though they were strong, it was not their technology. Though they were clever, it was their hearts. Hearts big enough to embrace strangers as family. Hearts fierce enough to fight impossible odds. Hearts soft enough to weep for those they could not save. Humans were not the largest species in the galaxy. They were not the oldest or the most advanced. But they were the most human, and somehow that made all the difference. Torvan finished his report with a single line. I finally understood why the cosmos trembles before humanity. They will burn worlds to protect a single child, and they will weep while doing it. He saved the document and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there,